Today's webinar is going to be about cultures of the African diaspora. We will have, speaking first, Shaka Hislop. Neil Shaka Hislop is a current on-air talent soccer analyst and commentator for ESPN Inc. Shaka has a Howard University alum, having graduated cum laude in 1992 with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. He then earned his second degree with HU in 2014 with an executive MBA. In between earning Howard's degrees, Shaka played soccer professionally for 15 years. Oh, cool. 14 of which was spent playing in England and 1 in the US's Major League Soccer. Shaka also represented Trinidad and Tobago at the international level throughout his career, including the country's solitary FIFA World Cup appearance in 2006. In 2005, Shaka was the recipient of the English Professional Football Association's Special Merit Award, for his services to the game of football, becoming a member of their honor roll, joining Brazilian soccer legend Pelé as the only other non-British member. Shaka is a founding member, patron, and honorary. Go ahead, Shaka.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me and allowing me to share in my own experiences. Obviously, as you're hailing from the Caribbean, and you can tell by my ethnicity, I'm very much a part of the African diaspora. Though I hasten to add, or I ashamedly add, that my own experiences in Africa came during the World Cup in 2010, when I went down to South Africa, spent my time in Johannesburg, but I promise to put that right in the coming years and in visiting the continent in a more meaningful way. I guess I'll tell them my own experience is shared largely by most people of my ethnicity in the Caribbean. Trinidad and Tobago, like most of the Caribbean, are English speaking, having been owned, most recently by the British up until 1962, Trinidad and Tobago becoming a republic in 1976. So we share a lot of their customs, not just their language, and also the colonialism has shaped a lot of who we are and how and our culture over recent years. Of course, that has caused any number of issues, particularly recently, as we try to rediscover our own heritage, rediscover what makes us unique, and find our own voices in the world today. I think one of the biggest issues that continues to plague so much of Trinidad and Tobago culturally is colorism, where sitting under the British rule and British regime, Black folk of a lighter skin hue were promoted to more prominent jobs, were afforded better opportunities, and now it shapes how you are seen, how you are received, your station in life. And though, as I mentioned, it's been in excess of 60 years, or just about 60 years now, since we've become independent. A lot of those mechanisms are still very much in place, and you can recognize that in terms of business ownership, in terms of opportunity, and to whom they're afforded. I guess in telling my own story, I always start by telling my father's. My father was born in 1935 in Trinidad and Tobago. He lost his dad at a very young age. I believe my dad was 8 when my grandfather passed away, and was raised in a single parent household in just outside the capital of Trinidad and Tobago, in a suburb called Woodbrook, just outside of Port of Spain. In the late 50s and early 60s, as England was recovering from from the World War, they started to advertise in the Caribbean, and as they did in most of their colonies, around labor, and particularly cheap and menial labor. My father took an opportunity to go to England. As I mentioned, at the time, late 50s, early 60s, Trinidad and Tobago was still a British colony. He went to England, where he was a teacher at Loughborough University. It was during his time as a teacher, and of course, as the UK started to recover post the war, the racism really began to ramp up, and it was a time of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. It was a time of incredible intimidation by police and law enforcement in an effort to get black people, to move black people out of mainland England and preferably back to their home countries. It was during this time that late one night, my father and a good friend of his were coming home one night. Two police officers pulled them over, took them into a parking lot, broke two car windows, and arrested them both for auto theft. They were let off, but they then sued the Metropolitan Police, where they won what was at the time a record settlement, £8,000 for their wrongful arrest. My father took that money, enrolled in law school, went back to Trinidad and Tobago for the first time in years to see his mom on a 6-week holiday, and during that 6-week holiday met and proposed to my mom. So in a rather roundabout way, I guess I have the racist police to thank for my being here. But I always tell that story because I think it speaks to the example that my father set, and one that I've tried to live my own life by. That regardless of the circumstance, regardless of how you're wronged, how can you best insert yourself in putting that right for people who look like you, who share your identity, who share so much of your own history. My dad, after graduating law school, moved back to Trinidad and Tobago, where he started by practicing private law. He then became a magistrate and senior magistrate in Trinidad and Tobago. I paused just to insert this one story. Recently, I was speaking with a friend of mine in Trinidad and Tobago. My father's now suffering with dementia. He is born in 85, so he turned 87 in May. Born in 35, excuse me, he turned 87 in May, and suffering with dementia. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who works in the media, and he told me that my father served as magistrate in one of these small towns in the northeast of Trinidad and Tobago, where he is still fondly remembered, because he, as opposed to jailing young men for infractions, he would give them community service, where they mowed lawns or tidied up garden beds or whatever, and gave these young men another opportunity. And the impact that he had in that community is still remembered, some 30 or 40 years later. And as I mentioned, just kind of recognizing my own father's frailties that come to all of us with time. It again spoke to the man who he was and how he continues to represent his own self. I go by my second name, as my bio pointed out. My mother always wanted to name her first boy child Neil. Hence, my first name is Neil, but my father insisted that we have an African name to better represent our history. So Shaka was my second name, but I've always gone by my second name. Even my mother has never called me Neil either. Bless her heart. So we've always, I'm the eldest of three boys, and so therefore our African heritage has always been a big part of our identity. We all go by our African second names. So it remains to be important. It remains to be important to us. As mentioned, following on from growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, there weren't an awful lot of opportunities for young men like me. I wanted to play football, wanted to further my education, and the best opportunity I had was to go to the United States to pursue a professional degree. Soccer, I got a soccer scholarship, so that paid the tuition, and I enrolled at Howard University, which is an HBCU, historically Black college and university here in the United States. I may be biased as a double alum of Howard University, but Howard, in many people's minds and mine, is the preeminent HBCU here in the United States. So I was immersed very much in the history and the culture of African Americans and their experience here on American soil, dating back to slavery days. Howard University was founded to first educate freed slaves who other universities did not cater to, and that culture still runs deep within the university halls. That's where I got my university education, and as mentioned, initially is in mechanical engineering, as it was initially my dream to design cars. After graduating, I thought I'd give football a shot, is what I did, is what I loved. And after a short trial, Reading, who were then in the second division, what is now League One, offered me my first professional contract. I went on I proudly say, to play football professionally for 15 years. But it was during that 15 years that I was founding member and founding patron of anti-racism charity Show Racism the Red Card. At the time, certainly, footballers never spoke about their experiences. Black footballers never spoke about the experiences of racism in the game. We all know the image of a banana being thrown at John Barnes. We've all heard the stories from players, from Viv Anderson being mailed a bullet when he was first named into the England squad, Laurie Cunningham, Luther Blissett. The names are endless, and the experiences are horrific. Yet at the time, and I say this completely unknowing to me, players simply did not speak about those experiences. The expectation was that you endured the abuse, you got on with your job. And while that may seem really odd in this day and age, in 2022, that was the accepted protocol. And I always take moment to thank those before me for enduring that racism. Without their sacrifices, without their enduring that kind of abuse, I don't think I could have been a professional footballer. People of our color would not have been afforded those opportunities. So I am thankful for them. But I was approached when I first joined Newcastle about starting this anti-racism charity, about going into schools and speaking about my own experiences in life and around the game, and how football can be used as a vehicle to address so many of the day's social ills. And that's where, as simply as that, is where Show Racism the Red Card was found. I'd been subject to racist abuse myself, not to the extent that some of the men before me had done, but I was able to speak to it. And from there, while I take no credit for it, but from there, the campaign was able to give platform to a number of Black players in England to speak about their own experiences and to address racism in the sport, and to a wider sense, racism in society. And that, for me, I will always be my proudest accomplishment, and the thing that I am most proud of being involved in, especially seeing how far the campaign has come, everything that it's gone on to represent, and how I represent. After graduating, after finally retiring from playing professional football in 2007, I've started working with ESPN Incorporated, covering football/soccer for the worldwide leader in sports as they are branded, and we go to any number of international networks around the world. While I've done that job now for over 14 years, I've been mindful of one thing: who I represent in speaking about the game, in sharing this platform. I want to represent people of color. I want to represent Black people the world over. More specifically, I want to represent those voices who have not been heard and are underrepresented in sport. So much in today's sport, in football. Let me be more specific, because I can speak about football specifically. So much around football is focused around European game and European experience. Yet football is the most popular sport in the world. It's played in all four corners of the earth. Yet if you hear a lot of the rhetoric, if you follow a lot of the coverage, you would not think so. So I feel it is my responsibility as a Black man hailing from a tiny island in the Caribbean to represent those people who play the game with as much passion, who love everything about the sport and all that it affords us, on the highest stage. That has always been the kind of guiding remit to who I am and how I speak about the game. So it's my Caribbean identity, my Blackness has always driven who I am and what I am about. Everything I do, I ask myself, how can I provide a platform? How can I provide an opportunity? How can I just provide better exposure for that young man or young woman growing up in a small country somewhere around the world, exactly like Trinidad and Tobago, looking for an opportunity, knowing that so many of us in so many of these corners are equipped to change the world for the better, but we are still denied those opportunities. We are still denied those platforms. Our voices are still lost in the wind. How can I use my own experiences and my own opportunities to provide for the next, in recognizing how much and has been endured by how many before me, for me to have and enjoy this space.
Thank you, Brother Shaka.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll do a brief recap to what Brother Shaka shared with us. He is originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and he started his story. His story is not just about him. He actually links it with his family. So he started with his father's, the story of his father coming to the England and finding opportunity, but also experiencing racism while there. But in spite of that, he was able to elevate himself to the extent that he was also became a lawyer, and also went back to his and to his home country, or his second home country, to help in empowering other young people. And he also mentioned about the influence of the British, their colonizers' culture, so be it English, right? So and even the idea of who is worthy of having opportunities. So even when the opportunities are being given to those who have proximity to whiteness, and that is the people that have a lighter skin. So colorism. And but he highlight the point about how there has been some level of progress to some extent that allows Black people of color to move forward in life. And the other part of, I think, what I noticed about Brother Shaka's story is about, in spite of all the struggles, for him, his immediate family, and also for himself, and also for other people, there's an effort to, as a Black person, to push for the progress of other Black people, as opposed to saying that I have arrived, because his story shows that he's actually been quite successful. He was a professional footballer, and now he has a career that many would ignore the plight of others, because for them it's that now I'm at a table. But he took the time to say that, everywhere I am, wherever I work, I will make sure that I represent people of color, more specifically Black people, and also linking himself not just to the African diaspora, or small country of Trinidad and Tobago, but also linking himself to Africa. The continent, the African identity. He mentioned about how his parents have, especially his father, insisted the importance of holding to that Africa, even though he has not spent a lot of time on the continent. I think since Brother Shaka is about to leave, we might have to ask some questions, should in case, he gets to leave, but at least we get to ask him some questions. And I also actually mentioned before I conclude my brief recap, Brother Shaka also shows how being African is not, you can be African and represent African people in many spaces. So even if you are at a table, you don't have to keep your mouth shut. You can find ways in which you can promote the agenda of your community to uplift your people. And Brother Shaka, I want to say, your story was quite emotional for me, because I have, for various reasons, but I appreciate the fact that, because I'm thinking of the Middle Passage, right? So with all this suffering that people of African descent experience, especially within the context of the Caribbean and more, Trinidad and Tobago, there's this still effort by diasporians to want to reach out to Africa, and not only to uplift themselves, but to uplift the continent. And thank you for your time here. So right now, I'll hand over to anyone that has a question. Please do ask Brother Shaka. And thank you for being here again.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead with questions.
My question that I want to ask to Brother Shaka is has to do with what he identifies himself more with. Is it a Black? You prefer to use the Black or the African or the Pan-African identity, and how that has reflected in the activities like the anti-racism activities you're currently involved in. And then the second one is, you talk about situation in which we have a maxim that whatever we're going through in the workplace, we're always told not to talk about it, not to raise some noise about it. But how has talking about it been helpful to those people that you have attended to in the course of this giving racism a red card? Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat the first question, please, Augustine?
The first question has to do with the Black identity, or the Pan-African identity, or the African identity. Which one and the sense you think it's being used. And I think the second one you have it already. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, and I'm going to say here, as far as how I identified, maybe I'm a little bit ignorant, and maybe I'm a little bit behind the times slightly. I refer to myself as Black simply because that's the phrase I learned growing up. That is a term that was used in Trinidad and Tobago to represent people of my hue, and I've stuck by that. I also recognize, though, that is very broad, and at a time where I think we have become more focused on our specific identities and trying to narrow that down because of there are marked differences in the Black experience the world over. The African experience from people from the continent who have their histories in the continent, it would be very different from somebody from the Caribbean. I mean, even in the Caribbean, in between Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, the Maroons in Jamaica have a very different experience to my own. But I left Trinidad and Tobago at 18, as a young man at 18, to go to the United States to study. And from there went to England. And so I found myself kind of maturing, coming of age, whatever term we want to use now, as being a Black man from the Caribbean in these large, majority white countries that have where Black people in general have had very difficult experiences. And so I wanted to speak to that overarching Black experience in these white majority countries. So while I now recognize that in today's world we may be more laser focused in how we identify and the differences in our experiences, I came of age speaking to a white majority about a Black minority's experience, either in those countries or in colonies of those countries. So I stick to the term that I learned as a young man. But as I said at the top, I recognize that I may be a little out of date at this point. I'm 53 years old and probably a little too old for this old dog to learn any new tricks. As far as not speaking out about our experiences, the second part to your question, Augustine, I think it's important to recognize that again, a shift in who we are and how we deal with these issues. So there was a time where, as long as let me use football as an example here. There was a time where, if there was racist chanting in the stadium, if you didn't contribute to that racist chanting, that was a significant step in the right direction. Now, don't get me wrong. That was a significant step in the right direction that you weren't contributing. But times have changed. And the ask of us as not just as Black people, but as anti-racists, regardless of how we identify, of people who are calling for equality, the ask has changed. Silence is now compliance. So if you remain silent, you are doing nothing in moving the issue forward. You are contributing. If you aren't, the old adage, if you aren't a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. And that, in terms of racism, in terms of equality, sums up exactly where we are today. So I say that not to cast dispersions on football fans who did not contribute to, who were maybe silent 30 or 40 years ago. But the times have changed, and the ask of each of us has changed to, that's no longer good enough. We have to be more meaningful, more purposeful in our actions.
Thank you for that response. I think we're going to ask more than one question. That way, we're able to get as many as possible. So my quick question actually for you, it has to do with why your mother, why did she name you Neil? And then the second question is coming from Shamuel. Shamuel, are you available?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, yeah. Could you please ask your question?
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask question. I want to ask, I personally, Shmuel Rushani, and I'm from Israel, and I want to ask you, if according to you, Moroccanian, Tunisian, Algerian, Ethiopian Jews that living in Israel, because in Israel situated in different communities from different places around the world, and I want to know if different Jews with African origins living in Israel those part of cultural heritage of African culture diaspora.
I'll answer that second part first, Shmuel, because I'm not sure that I'm best equipped to answer that. To sum up your question, you're asking if North African Jews arriving in Israel, how they identify as African, as Israeli, or as Jewish. As I say, I don't think I'm equipped to answer that. I'm not African, so nor am I Jewish, so I can't speak to either experience. And I think for me to speculate on identities that people hold so dear, I don't think that is for me to do at all. I am happy to hear your or anybody else's opinions on it. As maybe you identify with one of those groups, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to insert myself into that space, given my lack of experience in that regard. And then to the first question, my mother it was an actor that she loved as a young girl growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, Neil. So I can't remember who the actor is. But again, of course, growing up in colonial Trinidad and Tobago, you're exposed to a lot of television and film from England. There was some actor, Neil, somebody or other, that she loved as a young girl, and decided as a young girl she'd name her son Neil. Now, forgive me, I have not even my mother has called me Neil in my entire life. So I don't really know a whole lot of history to my first name.
Thank you. And do we have any other question for Brother Shaka? I was wondering, actually, why do you identify as Black, and you also have a desire to connect with Africa, but at the same time, you just said that you are not African, so you are not equipped, at least partially. So I'm wondering, for you, is being African just coming from, or being born and raised from the continent, or what does that mean?
No, I think, well, to this panel, there's an African diaspora that you recognize, Black people the whole world over, but our experiences wherever you may hail from are very different. My experiences, as I say, my experiences as a Caribbean man are very different from yours, who you may have grown up on the continent. My experience from hailing from Trinidad and Tobago is very different from someone who in Jamaica, who is also in the Caribbean, but they have a very different experience given their very different history from our own. I understand and appreciate where my history is. I don't know how far back my own history and arrival or my forefathers' arrival in the Caribbean goes. But I know my forefathers hail from Africa, somewhere in Africa. And I'd like to get to know more of the continent. I just know more of that side of my history. But because of how my life has played out, I just simply haven't had the time to visit and appreciate it in a more meaningful way. So I do not want to. I don't feel like I can speak to the experiences of an African from the continent in much the same way that you may not be able to speak to the experiences of a Black person in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. Thank you very much for the opportunities that you continue to provide to so many people who look like us, who need that support, who need their own voices and experiences echoed. Thank you.